Premier of Ontario is joining us right now. Premier, thank you so much for joining us. This new plan is expected to be the most aggressive move yet by a tariff-consumed American president. What is the mood there in Ontario and indeed the rest of Canada as we await this announcement later today?
Well, thanks so much for having me on. And I start every interview saying how Canadians love Americans. I love Americans. We love the U.S. And what this is going to do is going to hurt American families. And the folks you had on just previous is 100% bang on. The lumber that homes are built, majority of it is coming from Canada. It's going to increase the cost of a house, the autos as well. We ship as many autos as we buy, but the cost of a pickup truck or an automobile is going to go up. And then the pharmaceuticals, too, that he's going to go after are going to hurt seniors on fixed incomes that get a lower cost on pharmaceuticals here in Canada. So these tariffs is nothing but a tax on Americans. And President Trump calls it Liberation Day. I call it Termination Day because a lot of people are going to be terminated from their jobs.
So explain a little bit more why you call it Termination Day.
Well, we're the #1 customer. We buy more goods off the U.S. than any country in the world, more than Japan, the U.K., and France combined. And if you go after Canada, we have no choice but retaliate. And I apologize to the American people. We shouldn't be doing this. And they were talking about cheese. Well, on the dairy products, in the last deal that President Trump made, the U.S. hasn't even hit their quota. So there's never been a tariff until after their quota, but they've never hit that quota. But let's sit down and negotiate a trade deal. Again, President Trump ran on, reducing inflation, creating more jobs. It's worked the total opposite. Consumer confidence is down, investment is stalled, inflation is happening, the markets are tumbling, and they're going to tumble today. And those are people's pension funds that invested into the markets. So this is not going to be good for the American people.
Premier, is Canada prepared for these tariffs? How will your country retaliate?
Well, right now, Wolf, there's 40 million people at a fever pitch. They're engaged, and they're ready to sacrifice. And I don't think my great friends, and I have a tremendous amount of friends in the U.S., they're kind of going on their merry way until they get hit. And they're going to get hit hard based on President Trump continuing to tariff. But he's doing it on all fronts around the world. He might have justification around the world. I would say China is the enemy, not Canada. But we're your closest allies and closest friends. We have a great trading relationship. Let's go back to that, create the AMCAN fortress, American-Canadian fortress, and we can take on the world. We'd be unstoppable. We'd be the wealthiest, safest, most prosperous 2 countries in the world.
As you know, Premier, President Trump has threatened to impose tariffs in the past. Then all of a sudden he backtracks, changes deadlines. Canada's Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, says your country is not interested in going through this, quote, psychodrama every 30 days. That's a direct quote. Adding, there's too much unpredictability and chaos coming out of the White House right now. Just yesterday, the White House said the president is open to negotiating these tariffs. Listen and watch this.
The president is always up to take a phone call, always up for a good negotiation, but he is very much focused on fixing the wrongs of the past and ensuring that American workers have a fair shake.
Premier, do you think the president might back off these massive new tariffs and possibly implement something much smaller?
Well, I really hope so. I'd like to just go back to the original deal. We had a great deal. He said it was the greatest deal ever. I guess it's not the greatest deal ever now. But, let's work together. Let's sit down. 2 greatest countries in the world. I understand there might be issues around the world, but not with your closest neighbor and closest ally. So we need to sit down and do everything we can to have certainty. No one likes uncertainty. People don't like it. Businesses don't like it. The market doesn't like it. And that's what we're facing right now because every single day something changes and it's hard to keep up.
Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has declared that the old relationship between the United States and Canada is now over. So what does this new relationship look like to you?
Well, I just feel that we have to settle this and have some stability in both economies. Once we have the stability, we sit down and renegotiate the USCA deal or the USMCA deal, and it will give people confidence, and people will start investing into their companies and growing the market. As I always say, you know, with the auto sector, you can't unscramble an egg that's been around since 1965. You have to make the omelet larger, and that's what we need to do to protect ourselves against countries that don't see eye to eye with us.
Yeah, you say you love Americans and you have a lot of friends here in the United States. We love Canadians. We have a lot of friends in Canada as well. This is an unbelievable situation that has actually developed. Premier Doug Ford of Ontario, thank you so much. Let's hope for the best.
Well, thank you, Wolf. God bless America. God bless Canada. We'll get through this together.
Well said.
You know, friends, we're here today because today's the day that Donald Trump's going to impose his tariffs on us. It's a day that Donald Trump's attacking our workers. And so we've got a message to Donald Trump. New Democrats and workers are going to fight back and defend our jobs and our country. We're ready to fight back. You know, Donald Trump is attacking not just our country, attacking our workers and our very way of life. He wants us to compromise on our values. He wants to compromise on who we are. We will not compromise. We will not back down. We will not give up, and we will win this fight. You know, Donald Trump represents a storm. He's an arsonist. He's setting fire to the economy, his own economy, and ours as well. He represents a storm. And in that storm, in that difficult time, Canadians know how to weather a storm. Canadians know how to get through a difficult time. And we do that by looking out for each other. We do that by supporting each other. We do that by taking care of our neighbors. That's what we do as Canadians. The way we fight back against Donald Trump is doubling down on who we are as Canadians and our value that we are better off and we are stronger when we look out for one another. Now,
against the U.S. On American products in Canada. Canada is the biggest client of the U.S. Jim, you've asked me that question in the past. You know, when you're in business, and I know many people watching us right now are in the business sector, you treat your client, your best client, well. And so our goal is to make sure that we end this trade war, that we get to a common understanding that this is hurting our Canadians and Americans, their wallets, and nobody's winning from it. But at the same time, of course, we want to make sure that we work with the White House. Of course, we want to make sure that we find an off-ramp. Of course, we're willing to have discussions, and that's my goal, working with Marco Rubio. But also, this is the goal of the Prime Minister, talking to the President, and as well the Secretary of Commerce and the Minister of International Trade here in Canada.
But the Prime Minister's words speak to something more lasting here. And it's not just him who's saying this. It's many Canadians themselves, right, who are quite voluntarily stopping buying U.S. products or canceling visits to the U.S. I wonder, who will Canada look to be a more reliable trading partner if the U.S. is no longer that reliable partner?
Well, we understand that we're now in an era of protectionism, and our entire country has been built on free trade amongst our provinces, but there's been many barriers to commerce within Canada, and we think that we can really do a better job at supporting ourselves inside our country. We're also looking, of course, at Europe. Canada's the most most European country of all the non-European countries, Jim. We're definitely looking at Japan and South Korea and looking at Asia. We're, of course, looking at Mexico. But fundamentally, Canadians have really good relationship with Americans. We're your best friends. We're your best neighbors, your best allies. And so we want to make sure that, well, we're putting maximum pressure on the Trump administration to make sure that they're backing off on their trade war, that we can find a way to find a solution. But on the security side, we know we need to invest more in our own industry. We need to rely more on our defense sector. We need to create jobs at home. We need to defend our own Arctic. And that's also the job we will be doing. We're now in campaign mode here back home in Canada. So we need to make sure that we have a strong mandate on the part of Canadians to make sure that we're sending also a message to the American administration that we stand up for Canadians.
It sounds like you're leaving the door open to some sort of reconciliation here. Do you have some hope, some optimism that perhaps President Trump will back off some of the worst trade threats? Because that's not, that doesn't seem to be the signals coming from the White House.
I'm in charge of diplomacy in Canada. My job is always to make sure that we put maximum pressure, that when I say maximum pressure, that we use all the tools in our toolkit to ultimately have this trade war end. But in the end of the day, we know there's going to be a negotiating table. That's the case in every war, including trade wars. And in that sense, we need to send a clear message now to Canadians, to Americans. And this is my way to make sure that ultimately we get to a good position at the negotiation table. That's why we're keeping our counter tariffs in place. That's why also we're the only country on earth that has put so much retaliatory tariffs on the table. Of course, we're talking with other countries. Of course, we're talking to the EU. Of course, we're talking to Mexico. Of course, we're talking to Japan and South Korea. Because what we're seeing right now is all these different tariffs are affecting ultimately jobs here at home, but also creating inflation across the board in many economies, and first and foremost in the US. And that's my message to Americans watching us right now, is tariffs are a tax on you, your family, and affecting also your wallets, of course.
Before we go, when we last spoke, you said that if Trump were to impose these sweeping tariffs, the U.S. and Canada would be in a trade war. And I wonder, are you in a trade war now?
Of course we are. We are. They've imposed executive orders against us. And that's why you've been hearing me using the term, Jim. And we didn't start this trade war. The U.S. administration did. And they can reverse course, but they can only reverse course if the American people themselves say it's enough, that they want to make sure that we get to a good place and we're able to ultimately get rid of these tariffs and also have a better relationship between